Deserts can be dangerous places if you aren't prepared for their unforgiving terrain and weather. White Sands National Park has seen its share of tragedy within its boundaries, with victims succumbing to the white sands nearly every year. But one boy survived in 2015 and made it out alive. Welcome to Morbid Outdoors, the podcast that ventures deep into the shadows of the wild. Here, we unravel the mysteries of missing persons, explore spine chilling legends, and share the most morbid stories that nature has to offer. From the depths of the dense forests to the highest mountain peaks, we'll uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the great outdoors. Join us as we navigate the eerie, the unexplained, and the terrifying. So if you dare, grab your gear and let's embark on a journey into the unknown. This is Morbid Outdoors. Hello, everyone. My name is Elise, and I'm your host. I just want to say thank you all for joining me today. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to have you here. So, today we're going to be discussing a location that I have visited several times, even before it was a national park. So, first, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the lands now known as White Sands National Park are part of the ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples who have lived with and traveled through the Tularosa Basin for thousands of years. This includes the Mescalero Apache, as well as the other Puebloan and Jornada Mongolan peoples whose histories and cultures are deeply connected to this landscape. We honor their enduring relationship with this place and recognize their continued presence, sovereignty, and stewardship of these lands. So, White Sands National Park wasn't a national park until I think 2019. Oh, I'm gonna say that wrong. Let me check. Yeah, 2019. So, President Trump signed this into a national park. It was previously a national monument. So, let's talk about some negative reviews. Um, Someone left a review, and this has to do with some news that came out a few years ago about footprints that were found within the national park that were supposed to be super, super old. So this person said, the main reason we came was to see the fossilized footprints, not pictures of them. The footprints are closed indefinitely. What a waste. What wasted a whole 7-hour trip for something good I could see online. The point of these places is to get out in nature and experience it in real life. My entire trip ruined by disappointment. And then the next one says, taking one look at the place, I fully expected to see Lawrence of Arabia leading a convoy of camels across the dunes, but was disappointed. They tell you to bring a gallon, in all caps, of water. And that is no joke because the air is so dry, it literally sucks the moisture out when you breathe. Despite the scorching sun, the sand was freakishly cool enough to walk on barefoot, which is apparently some science thing here. Parking was ample, so I just like that one. And then these are ones that I found and like it's White Sands National Monument or National Park. Somebody said literally just sand, comma, like why? Question mark, question mark. And then another review said, it's not even sand. And then the next review says, I dislike sand greatly. And then the next review, not enough sand. And then the final negative review, sand everywhere. So I think people are in a disagreement on if it's sand or not. There's not enough, there's too much. This is why I love the negative reviews because they make no sense, but I love them. So let's talk about White Sands. Now, this is a national park in the United States that's in New Mexico, and it's completely surrounded by White Sands Missile Range. The park covers over 145,000 acres or 227.8 square miles. It's in the Tularosa Basin, and it's basically a giant field of white sand dunes composed of gypsum crystals. This gypsum dune field is the largest of its kind on Earth, with a depth of about 30 feet or 9.1 meters. And the dunes get as tall as 60 feet or 18 meters. And basically, it's like 4.5 billion short tons of gypsum sand. So it's very massive. It looks small from super far away. Like there's a hike that I did in the Lincoln National Forest and you can actually see the white sands from way, 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 way up. It looks tiny, but it's actually pretty large. So White Sands National Park was originally designated was as White Sands National Monument on January 18th, 1933 by President Herbert Hoover. Since 1941, the park has completely been surrounded by the military installations of White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base. It was redesignated as a national park by Congress and signed into law by President Donald Trump on December 20th, 2019. It is the most visited national park service site in New Mexico, with about 600,000 visitors each year. The park features a drive from the visitor center to the heart of the dunes where there's picnic areas, backcountry campground and the dune field, marked hiking trails, and sledding on the dunes, which I have done all. Ranger guided orientation and nature walks occur at various times and months throughout the year. So let's talk about how this kind of formed. Approximately 12,000 years ago, the land within the Tularosa Basin featured large lakes, streams, grasslands, and ice age animals. But as the climate warmed, rain and snowmelt dissolved gypsum from the surrounding mountains and carried it into this basin. Further warming and drying caused the lakes to evaporate and the selenite crystals and form selenite crystals. Strong winds then broke up the crystals and transported them eastward. A similar process continues to produce gypsum sand today. So it basically happened over thousands and thousands of years. And it is so beautiful. I mean, if you've never been, I think you should go. It's super family friendly. You can bring sleds or snowboards, and you can actually sled or board down the dunes. It's very, very fun. I think the first time I went, I was 16. I remember I'd just gotten my braces off, and it wasn't super busy. I feel like now that it's become a national park and it has that elevated status, a lot more people are visiting than previously. And those footprints that that commenter, that reviewer were wanting to see are the oldest known human footprints in North America. And they were actually pretty recently found in White Sands by researchers who identified approximately 60 fossilized footprints buried in layers of gypsum soil on a large playa in the Tularosa Basin. Paleo Indians inhabited the shoreline of Lake Otero, a large lake that covered much of this basin. They used stone from the mountains to create projectile points, known as Folsom and Plano points, and attached them to spears for hunting mammoths, camels, ground sloths, and bison. There have been projectile points and stone tools found in this basin associated with ancient shorelines, streams, and hills. And this is really an area that is super rich in human history. It is really awesome to visit and see, and not just to go to White Sands, but even the surrounding areas like Lincoln National Forest and other places. Carlsbad Caverns is also in South New Mexico, but it's a little ways away from White Sands. In terms of first people, the Hornana Mongoyan people made pottery, lived in permanent houses, and farmed in the Tularosa Basin. Evidence of their prehistoric presence dates back to about 200 CE. The Hornada people inhabited the basin until about 1350 CE when they moved away, leaving behind puddled adobe structures and pottery shreds. And then over 700 years ago, bands of Apaches followed herds of bison from the Great Plains to this Tularosa basin. The Apaches were nomadic hunters and gatherers who lived in temporary houses as wickiups and teepees. The Apaches had established a sizable territory in southern New Mexico by the time European settlers arrived. They fiercely defended the rights to their homeland against the encroachment of colonial settlers. Apache groups led by Victorio and Geronimo fought with settlers in this basin and engaged in military battles with buffalo soldiers. So, like I said, really, really rich in history. Despite it being a desert, there are thousands of species of animals that live within this park. Several animal species feature a white or off white coloration, obviously, evolution, and at least 45 species are endemic, living only within this park, with about 40 of them being moth species. The Tularosa Basin has also seen a number of human inhabitants, from Paleo Indians 12,000 years ago to modern farmers, ranchers, and miners. And one thing I find really interesting about White Sands is there's this whole I don't know, you read about it when you go to the park and you don't really believe it, but it's something that I often forget about this park. So, between the years of 1969 and 1977, 95 orcs were released on the Missile Range and adjacent areas of the Tularosa Basin by the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish for hunting purposes. So, if you don't know what that is, an oryx is one of those animals that lives in Africa. They are kind of black and they have white on their face with black, sort of like a big, like gazelle, and it has two horns, but they're pretty sturdy. So basically, these were released in the adjacent area, and the oryx had no natural predators. They entered the park and competed with native species for food, for grass and everything. Thousands of oryx reside on the Missile Range presently, though annual hunts have occurred since 1974 to help control and stabilize the population. The National Park Service has been concerned about the negative effects on native plants and animals within the park, and they erected a 67-mile or 108-kilometer long boundary fence in 1996 to prevent the oryx from entering. But there's always a chance you still could see them. So it's just really weird that, like, a long time ago, people brought them from the Kalahari Desert in Africa to basically live so that they could be hunted for fun. It's just weird because you could be out in White Sands and see an oryx or many oryxes or oryxi. I don't know what the plural is, but you could see this really beautiful creature from Africa in White Sands, New Mexico. So, very interesting. I love that story. It is really weird. So, like I said earlier, the park is completely surrounded by military installations that include White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base. And basically, like, it's always had an uneasy relationship with the military. The missile range and Air Force Base were established after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, with continuing operations after World War II and throughout the Cold War. There have been many missiles that have fallen within the park's boundaries and occasionally destroying some of the visitor areas. So I, read through the incident reports, and on multiple occasions have missiles and other objects that shouldn't be within the park have fallen in the park, and people find them and it's unsafe, and then the park has to close, and it does routinely close for missile activity in the surrounding area. So just know that if you go, there's always a chance that they might be conducting missile stuff and you wouldn't be permitted to enter the park on those certain days. White Sands National Park has a continental or cold semi arid climate that borders closely on the cold desert climate. So it's a desert, right? They don't get a lot of rain and it can get super, super hot during the summer months. The warmest months are April through October, when the average high temperature reaches or exceeds 79 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 degrees Celsius, and the daily mean temperature of the range is 60 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 to 27 degrees Celsius. Afternoon temperatures in June and July averages around 97 degrees Fahrenheit or 36 degrees Celsius. The highest recorded temperature was 111 degrees Fahrenheit or 44 degrees Celsius, and it was set on June 22nd, 1981. The cooler months are November through March when the average low temperature is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. So I've actually camped in this area in November, and it was quite pleasant at night because it was still warm during the day and didn't get too cold at night. So honestly, I recommend visiting in like October, November, or during the shoulder seasons, right? Less people, better weather, and it's just nice to have it be not as crowded. But then again, there's school and everything. I've gone in June, and I've gone in November, and I've gone in January, and all were great experiences, but I think I much prefer when it's not, like, baking you because as you're in the white sands reflect the sun back onto you, and it really, really gets so hot. March and July are the two busiest months with more than 60,000 visitors each, or about 2,000 visitors per day, while November through February have the fewest visitors with less than 1,000 people per day. So, both the park and US Route 70 between Las Cruces and Alamogordo are subject to closure for safety reasons when tests are being conducted at the White Sands Missile Range. Dunes Drive may be closed for periods of up to 3 hours during missile tests, and park staff is usually notified 2 weeks in advance of scheduled tests. However, notifications from White Sands Missile Range may be received as little as 24 hours in advance for a test. So you might get there and they'll be like, sorry, we're closed. And that would really, really suck. There's a lot of activities that are offered, like horseback riding, backcountry camping, hiking, sledding, and driving, and these are all prohibited during all missile tests that require road closures. So, I want to go over some of the safety tips that the National Park Service has published online, specifically regarding white sands. Their safety tips include being aware of the weather because sudden windstorms are frequent from February through May, and fast building thunderstorms are super common in the basin July through September. They also advise being prepared for various temperatures throughout the day because summertime daytime temperatures can often reach over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius, and as cold as 10 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 12 degrees Celsius in the winter. They advise bringing 1 gallon or 4 liters of water per person per day. That's the recommendation because water is only available at the visitor center. They also recommend bringing salty snacks and making sure to balance water intake with eating to stay properly hydrated. Remain in one place if you ever become separated for your group. You are also supposed to drive safely, obey traffic signs, and wear your seatbelt. No drinking and driving, of course, this has been an issue in White Sands. And it also says to be extremely careful digging holes in the sand. Sand is unstable and can easily collapse, causing injury or suffocation. As I mentioned, missiles have been found in this national park. So the national park has a special thing that says, do not touch unknown items out in the dune field. Unexploded ordnance can sometimes be found in the park. So doubly be very careful. Later on some different safety tips, they recommend sun protection, a hat, sunscreen, and long sleeves are all recommended to protect yourself from sunburn in the dunes. Sun protection is still needed in the dunes during the winter season. They say to bring adequate clothing, of course, and closed toed shoes are suggested because venomous snakes can be found throughout the dune field. Also, always have a first aid kit and bring a flashlight. So, lots of people have died in White Sands National Park from heat related illnesses, hypothermia, dehydration, and getting lost. Heat exhaustion can be a very serious threat when recreating in White Sands. So, signs of heat exhaustion include nausea, vomiting, fatigue, headaches, pale appearance, stomach cramps, and cool, clammy skin. So, if anyone in your party ever suffers from this, you're supposed to find a shaded area. Good luck with that at White Sands. Drink water slowly, loosen tight clothing, apply cool wet cloths or ice packs to your skin, and if heat exhaustion symptoms persist, you're supposed to seek medical help by calling 911. And this is exactly what happened in 2015. So, I want to talk about the trail that this family was on when tragedy struck. They were on Alkali Flats Trail, and from the National Park Service website, it says it's 5 miles or 8 kilometers round trip. The trail marker color is red, and the trail marker symbol is a diamond. So even though you're hiking in the desert, they do have trail markers out in the dune field. Average completion time is 3 hours. It does rate the difficulty as strenuous, and it's 7 miles or 11.2 kilometers from the visitor center. And then this is the National Park Service's like little blurb about this hike. Imagine yourself surrounded by spectacular views of endless dunes with few footprints. If you yearn for these views, the Alkali Flats Trail is for you. This trail takes you through the heart of the sands, up and over steep dunes, to the edges of the Alkali Flat. The Alkali Flat is the dry bed of Lake Otero, a lake that filled the bottom of the Tularosa Basin during the last ice age and covered 1,600 square miles. Now, although the name says Alkali Flat, this trail is not flat at all, and it's used for foot travel only, so there's no bicycles, horses, or motorized vehicles allowed on this trail. Look carefully for the next trail marker before continuing. If you cannot see the next trail marker because of blowing sand or because the trail marker is knocked down, do not proceed. Return to your car. So it can be the visibility can be reduced during those windstorms that I had previously mentioned. So, our story actually starts on a scorching August day, August 4th, 2015, when a small family were visiting the White Sands for the first time. The family of three were visiting from France, the Steiners, David, the dad, Ornella, the mom, and their 9-year-old son, whose name was not mentioned in any articles because he is a minor, so I do not know his name. I can only imagine how mesmerizing a place like White Sands would be to international tourists. So they were visiting White Sands National Park before it had gotten its national park status, and it was still a national monument in 2015. They decided they were up for a challenge, and so they hit the Alkali Flat Trail around noon on a scorching day. Now, there's virtually no shade or shelter from the blazing sun and soaring temps, and daytime temperatures peaked at 101 degrees Fahrenheit on August 4th, 2015. At first, it was probably wonderful for this family. Endless sight of bright white sand looking just like snow that went on for miles. It was a dream, but then the dream quickly faded into a nightmare. Because the mom, Ornella, she was 51 at the time, she began feeling ill on the trail and decided to turn back to the family's vehicle, but collapsed after only a few hundred yards. David, who was 42, and his son, they pressed on. They wanted to do this hike. Now, park rangers found the body of Ornella around 5:30 p.m. during a routine patrol of the trail. Looking at Ornella's cameras for clues, these rangers saw photos of a man and a boy at the park's entrance, and they instantly knew that this was her family and they were unaccounted for at this time, so deputies extended their search. They found the father and son about 45 minutes later, slightly off the trail. David was dead, but his son was still alive, but he was suffering from heat exposure. The son wasn't crying when rangers found him, but he was dehydrated and he was upset. He was quickly taken to a hospital, and the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department took custody of him. The boy's grandmother flew from France to Albuquerque to care for him, and authorities did not release his name. But from what he told investigators, Ornella, who wasn't feeling well that day, she actually had a previous knee injury and so was bothering her. So she headed back to the trailhead, but only made it about 300 feet before collapsing. And after walking about a mile, David and his son left the trail and either rolled down or fell down a dune. Now, unfortunately, this family only carried two small bottles of water, and they only took one sip for every two that they gave to their son. After 4.5 hours, this family had run out of water. And that's what the boy told the rangers and law enforcement. After his parents gave a drink, or they took a drink, they would give him two drinks. And that is definitely how he fared so well and survived out here after having run out of water and both of his parents dying in the white sand dunes. Now, local sheriff House said, I don't think they were prepared for the heat. I think they just thought it was a trail and that they would walk it. They started out together. The mother had gotten ill. It wasn't very far before she went down. And then farther up the trail, the father went down. It's just a tragedy. Through an interpreter, the boy described his father as confused and having lost his bearings. The sheriff said it appears that the father was disoriented, which is a common symptom of heat stroke according to the CDC. The Steiners' deaths were the third and fourth at the park in the past 10 years, says the sheriff's office. And basically, this family, they underestimated the heat and they succumbed to the elements out in White Sands. And the only reason their son survived is because they were giving him more water than they were drinking themselves. It's just really sad because even in the parking lot and on the trail signs for this trail, there are so many warnings about the weather, the trail conditions, and how much water to bring. And so it baffles me that people can see those and not know that they need to bring more water. I mean, it's right there on the sign. And I'm not trying to victim blame at all. I've made dumb decisions when I've been outside as well. But you cannot underestimate the desert. You need to have more water than you think that you'll need because you could get lost and you don't really know how your body is going to be affected in those environments. You need so much water. So they only brought 2 water bottles. They should have had 12 liters of water. But the Steiners aren't the only ones who have underestimated white sands over the years. I went back through old incident reports, and so I'm going to read the ones. And the first one that we have is from September 2002. On Saturday, September 21st, two hikers discovered the body of a man tentatively identified as that of KF 29, a Japanese citizen who became lost in the park on September 9th or 10th. He was found just over a mile southeast of Dunes Drive and nearly 2 miles south of his vehicle and the primary search area. The state medical investigator will conduct an autopsy to determine the cause of death and verify his identity. A fanny pack with various documents and KF's name was found nearby. There was no evidence of foul play in the area where his remains were found, which is really sad. It's so sad because people go out in this beautiful area and they're not prepared and they perish. Then in June 2011, this one's subject is Woman Dies While Hiking Alkali Flat Trail. A 23-year-old woman from Sheldon, Iowa, died yesterday while hiking the Alkali Flat Trail. EH was hiking with a friend when she began experiencing symptoms of distress. Her friend quickly hiked back to the trailhead to retrieve additional water and ice from their car and called 911 from her cell phone around 1 p.m. When her friend returned to the scene, she found EH unconscious and began CPR. Upon receiving the 911 call, rangers hike about a half mile to her location on the trail and continued CPR. Paramedics from Alamo West Volunteer Fire Department also responded and provided assistance, but were unable to revive her. The Alkali Trail, Flat Trail, is a 5 mile loop trail traversing the park's dunes. The high temperature yesterday was near 100 degrees. Hikers are advised to be prepared for extreme temperatures and bring at least 1 gallon of water per person, sunglasses, sunscreen, and high energy snacks. Rangers are investigating this incident. The cause of death is being investigated by the New Mexico Office of Medical Investigator. Then in 2015, the Steiners perished out there. And then just 4 years later, in June 2019, a hiker's death was attributed to heat exposure. A 70-year-old German visitor who died on Alkali Flat Trail on June 8th likely succumbed to heat exposure. The park received a call for help around 4 p.m. that day. Responding rangers found the body of Peter Kramer less than a mile from the trailhead. New Mexico State police officers assisted rangers and are working with them on the investigation into the cause of his death. Rangers at White Sands say Saturday's temperatures reached 99 degrees. Kramer and his wife were hiking the trail together, but she opted to return to their car because of the heat. When he failed to return, she notified the park. Then, 2 years later, in July 2021, a missing hiker was found dead. The vehicle of 63-year-old J.M. was found late on the evening of July 4th. National Park Service staff searched all night without finding evidence of the hiker. The following morning, several local law enforcement, EMS, and search and rescue teams, as well as the Border Patrol and Oregon Mountain Technical Rescue Squad, responded, and the team was able to find the victim's footprints. They tracked the prints until they found him deceased. Investigation is underway, and foul play is not suspected. His name was um, Jeffrey Minshew, and he was found after his vehicle was found. So it's just, all in all, it's just heartbreaking that this happens so often at White Sands. Then, a year later, in July 2022, a 27-year-old was found deceased off trail in a park by search and rescue team. Foul play is not suspected. The cause of death was not announced, but park officials did warn about the dangers of hiking in extreme temperatures. His name was Brad Utigar, and he was a hiker from Wisconsin. And I don't know, it's just heartbreaking because there are so many, like, we have innate knowledge on the internet. And also, when we visit the national parks, we can always talk to rangers and ask them questions, and they will tell you. So many times, rangers give good advice and suggestions to visitors, and they ignore that, and they go on, and then a lot of times people die because they did not heed the rangers' warnings. I don't know if that's what happened in these cases, but there are signs literally everywhere. So there's really no reason that people are perishing out in these fields if they would heed those signs. Despite its beauty, White Sands National Park can be deadly. And Ornella Steiner came to visit White Sands for beauty, for quiet, and for the kind of stillness you can only find in wide open spaces. What they encountered instead was a landscape that offers no mercy to unprepared hikers, only heat, distance, and silence. Their deaths weren't the result of malice or mystery, but of how quickly nature can turn from awe inspiring to unforgiving. In the vast white dunes, there are no landmarks, no shade, and no second chances when water runs out and time runs short. White Sands looks gentle, but it isn't. What happened to David and Ornella is tragic, but it's also a reminder. The desert doesn't care about how experienced you are, how confident you feel, or how peaceful the day looks when you start. It only responds to preparation, awareness, and respect. Their story now lives alongside the dunes that never left. And the best way to honor them is not to just remember what happened, but to learn from it, to carry water, to know your limits, and never forget that even the most beautiful places can become deadly when underestimated. As always, recreate responsibly and remember, sometimes the great outdoors aren't always great. Thanks for listening to Morbid Outdoors. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform. It's free, easy, and it helps us out immensely. When you subscribe, you get updates on our latest episodes, and it also boosts our visibility, making it easier for other curious souls to find us. Another great way to support Morbid Outdoors is by leaving us a review. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, a quick review helps us know what you love about the show. You can also join us on Patreon for early and ad-free content. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Morbid Outdoors Podcast. You can email us case suggestions and your campfire stories at morbidoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for the support, and I'll see you next time.